which was pretty revealing, and everyone spoke their minds. And then this morning again, and we actually got to near some solutions, but certainly where we can put a small work group together and finally resolve these issues. So that's the end of tank, and we're going on to item 9, outstanding water bodies plan change 7. I know you're all excited about this.
Before we, given that we are on a what looks to be a glide path landing here, is there any point in discussing 8, how we would proceed?
No.
No, I wouldn't think so, Tom. That's interlinked to that little group we've formed, you and Peter.
Mr. Chairman, yesterday did you discuss the issue of the allocation to iwi of high flow water, which apparently a number of iwi representatives did not agree with and found it offensive?
So no, we haven't discussed it, and we're not proposing to discuss it now. We'll take that offline and see whether that comes back as part of the package for the 14th of August, and it may well fall out of the package based on the feedback being received.
The thing is that staff have said that they want to leave something like that in there, but I have a view that if our partners don't want it, then staff should take notice of that.
Well, I think the staff are trying to be faithful to the recommendations of the TANK group, and it was the TANK group that resolved to include it with some dissension. But I think we've got a clearer view now, so that'll all be worked out.
We'll let our little working group do it, Alan. It's not like you to introduce a subject which could take an hour if it hit the table.
Sorry, I can't hear you properly.
Not like you to introduce a new subject which could take an hour of our time.
No, it's not actually.
It's not, no. So let's move to item 9. And I know,
Chair, if I could just, through you, there has been a point made in response to Councillor Belford's request for item 8. If there is this glide through, we might use that opportunity, if there's an appetite for the streamlined process, to then have some discussions with Wellington. Sorry?
If there is some general enthusiasm for a streamlined planning process, we could start the conversations with the Ministry for the Environment now, ahead of any decision making on that.
It's a good idea to speed things up. There's no commitments, but just to start those conversations.
Because we've made no decision.
Correct. It's just
On what process?
streamlined plan process.
Yeah, no, we haven't made a decision on what process to follow.
No, correct.
No, okay. Talk to your heart.
so what are we saying here?
Well, that wouldn't be preemptive if we had early discussions to explore a streamlined course as opposed to another. It doesn't mean a decision has been made.
Correct.
Just having that on the table.
Are you happy with that?
If the committee are happy with that we initiate those discussions.
Yeah, we are.
Okay.
But you still go
Subject to-
through a notified process, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the point is we're not making a decision.
No.
So if you want to have the conversations, but we haven't made a decision.
That's
so
cool.
you might come back and say, we've had the conversations, it's all looking good, and we might decide no.
Yes.
Okay, can we go to item 9, please? Come out on no. I'm about to shoot you. I can't see you around here. You're like invisible. I like it like that.
Okay, well, hi everyone. I am going to dive straight in, and I'm just going to give you a quick recap on outstanding water bodies. I'm going to talk a little bit later on about what's happened in the last 6 weeks. But before I do that, I might do a little run over the process from 2017 and the directions and the scope. I'll run relatively quickly through this because you all know what's happened. But it sets the basis of why the plan change took the direction it did. So back in 2017, the plan change was prepared, and the directions of the RPC were that it would be done via a high-level review. Based on existing literature, no new studies. From that, shortlist water bodies that were most likely to contain outstanding values, and then secondary assessments and consultation with iwi.
I don't know where it is. I think it's up there.
Underpinning that was some quite key directions. and that's how the lit review it looked at an outstanding water bodies. It really is a water body which contains a ecological, cultural, rec, landscape value which stands out from the rest. It excluded consumptive and economic use values and included estuaries. There was also a decision to focus solely on outstanding values, so that there wasn't the significant values weren't looked at. Moving forward, following that scope, we looked at around 80 documents for the cultural value set and 16 documents for the other value sets. Those documents included for the cultural value set, deed to settlements, customary usages, stat acknowledgements, happy management plans, and you can see the rest up there. And for the other 16 documents for the other value sets, the reverse assessments informed them quite a lot. Directory of Wetlands, Geopreservation Inventory, and as you can see up there. So all that information came together and that was collated into 2 tables. So there was a cultural values table and a recreational, landscape and ecology values table. The cultural values table had 118 water bodies in it, and the other value sets had 62. This information all came back to the RPC, and there were 22 candidate outstanding water bodies identified from that list. And that list was really identified, those water bodies were those that were most likely to contain an outstanding value. From there, we went away and we met with iwi authorities, stakeholders, district, city councils, and we attempted to fill any information gaps in those tables. And a lot of the feedback we heard back was on the plan change, and then also that we hadn't identified a full list of potentially outstanding water bodies. And through that process, an additional 20 water bodies got nominated. And then, so from there, with a new 42 water bodies, we engaged a local expert panel, and they were engaged to assess the full list of 42 water bodies. And then we come back to May 2019, which is 6 weeks ago, and all this information was presented back to the RPC. So as you'll be aware, this was all discussed in the May meeting around which water bodies to be shortlisted into Plan Change 7 or whether a full list goes forward. At the time, it was recognised there was quite a bit of lack of information around some of the water bodies, especially for the cultural value set. So at the time, it was decided to, okay, let's put in all 43 water bodies into the draft plan change. But to fill the information gaps, there was a 2-step process talked about with, in the 4-week period, which was the pre-notification period, a small amount of resourcing would be given to iwi authorities to assist with placeholder information. And this was really in recognition that it's a short time frame. There's not very many people, iwi authorities, that will be able to get back with very much information, but at least we could say, yes, that they've come back and there's definitely some really key values we need to focus on here. And then a larger amount of resourcing was talked about for the next extended 6-month submission period. And that was to allow the information to come forth. Yes, we've got the placeholder information. Now we've got the rest of the information coming forward through this process. So, moving on to, after that meeting, so the plan change got adopted for pre-notification consultation. 55 letters were sent out to various groups, and over that time we had 13 responses. If you're interested in the responses, you can have a look at Appendix 1, or it's summarised in the Section 32 report on page 27. And the key concerns really raised, or questions as well, about the plan change. One was in direct opposition, saying that was an iwi authority, all water bodies are outstanding. This just doesn't align with the view. Other submissions we got back, or other feedback, was, look, there's a really big number of water bodies that you've identified as outstanding, and that doesn't really relate to what outstanding is. Some of the other feedback was where are the consumptive and economic uses. They're not identified as outstanding water bodies or outstanding values and don't have the potential to be. And then some of the other feedback was the lack of evidence, really, which we knew when the draft was adopted, that not all water bodies had the evidence there. Quite a few concerns about the lack of clarity as well, and in that it wasn't quite clear the difference between the outstanding and the significant values. And there were some information gaps in terms of the outstanding values of some of the water bodies. What are they? Why are you identifying them in this plan change? There was some uncertainty around what this meant for resource consent applicants, both for any new ones coming through and if anyone was coming for a renewal. Some questions raised why the water bodies were separated into lower and upper reaches and how the rule framework will tie in to the Plan Change 7 provisions. So in response to this, staff went through the plan change and had a look and where we provide further clarification. Are there amendments that need to be made? What can we do? So if you turn to Appendix 2, you'll see Plan Change 7 and you'll see your red text. I'll wait for you to get there. So the red text is the draft Change 7 as was adopted at the 14th of May RPC meeting.
Say the page again?
162.
162.
Sorry.
Have we turn the lights on? Thank you.
Here you are, G.
Okay, so if everyone's on it. Thank you. So you'll see the different colours here. The blue is the staff recommendations. The red is what has been adopted by this committee 6 weeks ago. If you're looking for just the key changes, page 4 of your agenda paper outlines them as well. Okay, so moving on to what the key changes are that staff are recommending. Policies LW3A and C2, essentially just delaying the effect of those policies. And that largely comes about providing more certainty to resource consent applicants come in so they know what they're protecting. By that time, either by 2025 or after the plan change has gone through a catchment-based plan change, those significant values will be all determined and then they'll know what they're trying to protect. Outstanding was defined, or was proposed to be defined, and also stating what policies LW3A and C2 relate to. Schedule 25, which is the list of outstanding water bodies, recombined lower and the upper reaches. And Boundary Stream and Shine Falls has been removed.
Could you direct me to where the definition is?
Yes. If you flip the start of Schedule 25,
Schedule.
which is in the back of the Appendix 2, so on the plan change.
Give us a page.
If you go to page 20 on the Appendix 2, it's different.
180.
180. I've got a different.
That's not helpful.
Wait, okay.
Oh, no, she wants that. Sorry, no, it's not. It's 179.
179, sorry.
179.
Where's my finger?
And that. So there was a definition of outstanding. So there's a definition there which you'll see was in the May version, which is outstanding water body. Outstanding freshwater body is proposed to be deleted just because the comments we got back was that it just wasn't apparent what the difference was. Confusing having two definitions, so we've incorporated them into one. We've also included descriptions of outstanding values, which is the next page if you go over, which is page 180, and you'll see that in the blue text.
What page are you
180.
180, 179.
on? 179, okay. I thought somebody said 170. Yep, okay.
And then the biggest change is the amendments to Schedule 25 itself, which is the list of outstanding water bodies. The staff recommendations are to only include those water bodies with sufficient information to support the outstanding status. And the reasons behind those on the list are set out in Appendix 6.
So by definition, we can assume out of the 42 rivers on the list, the 20 on this current table, the remaining 22 just didn't have enough information. We can make that assumption.
And well, so the 42 comes back to 38 by the time you recombine the intake off Shine Falls and Boundary Scream. Yeah, so 18 of them didn't have enough information to support it going forward. So that really leaves, because I mean that's really the major key difference in the draft to what has now been recommended. So I'll just talk a bit about the options around the list. So there's two principal options essentially. There's adopt your list of 38 water bodies, go for an extended 6-month submission process, provide additional resourcing to iwi authorities to support them to get the information of the outstanding status, and then carry on the process through the hearings. That's not a standard policy approach, but it can be done. And the second option, which is staff's recommended option, which is a more standard planning approach with using evidence-based decisions, is to adopt the reduced list, which is 20 water bodies, carry out the same process, but then add the water bodies during the 6-month extended submission process via the submissions. So before I take questions on that, I'll just carry on because I've got just a bit of clarification around it to make it clear. So both involve a 6-month submission period. Both involve work with iwi authorities to complete the information gaps. Both options are appropriate in the Section 32 report. That's outlined in your Appendix 5. Kerry will give you the page number if you need it. However, option 2 has been recommended because it's standard planning approach, and that is the approach that you generally take. There's less risk that this process will be challenged if you go with your list of water bodies that are defendable. However, option 1 can still be done. It's appropriate in the Section 32 report when you line it up against delaying or not progressing Plan Change 7, because the risks of doing that are far greater than notifying a plan change with 38 water bodies, some that you don't have evidence for. You can mitigate this risk by having a 6-month submission period where you collect the additional information. Also, we're not starting from zero, from blank. The RPC tangata whenua reps have advised us that these water bodies are outstanding. So we've got some base to go on.
Question for me there. If we were to go with option 1 and then during the 6 months seek further information, that we would be doing that at our cost, whereas if we were to do option 2, then tangata whenua would be expected to produce the evidence at their cost?
No, both options involve the same amount of resourcing for the iwi authorities to go and research their values and talk to marae and hapu and come back to us. So the amount of resourcing does not change depending on what option you take.
Council's resourcing both options is what you're saying?
Yes, yeah.
Yep.
Yep. So I'll get to the difference in a second. So in terms of the risks of delaying and not progressing Plan Change 7 versus the other two options, one of the biggest ones are our RPS is saying that an outstanding water bodies plan change needs to be undertaken prior to the next catchment-based plan change, notified. So if that's not taken, you're potentially increasing your costs or delays towards your catchment-based plan change via legal challenges, which anyone could raise. And not just that, it actually pushes HBRC's work program out, and then that delays improvement of all water bodies throughout the region and everything else that the MPS is wanting. Also, delays to the work program will mean that the
Councillor Barker, would you
MPS
behave?
may not be implemented by 2025. And on top of that, there's no assurance that those special and treasured water bodies will be protected moving forward if you don't progress Plan Change 7.
It will be boys.
So the key differences
I was watching.
outlined here.
Sorry about that. There's just some rude behaviour going on in your
Terribly rude.
presentation.
We're not.
Carry on.
We're multitasking.
That's true. So the key differences are really identify 38 water bodies despite the lack of evidence, and gather that additional evidence during your submission period in support. Or option 2, identify your 20, which we have evidence for, and then add the others via submissions. Resourcing's still the same, process is still the same, it's just they get there slightly differently. Option 1's more standard, option 2's not. Both meet the Section 32 requirements. So these are your next steps. Adopt Plan Change 7 for notification, notify Plan Change, which I'm sure you're all well aware of, and then staff recommendations.
I'll move.
Questions? You won't move. In fact, you weren't moving, Ruben. Questions? Tanya?
Can we go back to the two options? You've got... Yeah. So option 1, we notify 38 water bodies. We allow 6 months with submission period. Let's just say it's iwi who come back with further information or evidence to support those water bodies.
That's correct.
In option 2, we only have 20 water bodies. iwi do the research, they come back with a further 18, the ones we know about, and with further evidence.
Correct.
In each of those two cases, what happens for those people who are submitting on the plan? So in the first case, they can see a list of 18 water bodies, but no information supporting them. In the second one, they don't know what the other 18 water bodies are. Then they materialise with evidence. Do you think there's a risk in both of those options that the public is not actually being able to submit on what we intend as the plan, which is with the 18 water bodies, let's say? That's the intention of tangata whenua, and I guess they will want to fill those gaps. So how does it work from a process perspective if you've got the risk that actually there's going to be substantive changes to the plan by adding 18 or adding information, and the other submitters haven't seen it?
Well, there's, so it's no different from any other plan that you notify. Even if we had 10 on this list or 100, when you notify, there might be another 50 or 80 out there that people can bring in through the submission process. They can go and gather their own evidence. It's not just up to that, like they might view that there's some that we haven't identified as outstanding. So it's no different to them bringing in an additional water body as the additional 18 that are coming in. And so they come in via submissions, and then you have a process called further submissions, where you notify all the submissions that have come in, and then people can have a chance to submit on the further submissions and say, oh, look, we don't agree, we do agree. You're going to get challenges to possibly every water body anyway, either option that you take, because it will affect people's operations potentially, and they will say, look, we don't agree that this is outstanding, and they will provide the evidence of why they don't believe this water body is outstanding.
So you don't see any challenge there, a potential for challenge?
There's risk with option 1, definitely. It's riskier than option 2. However, going through the Section 32 analysis, you've got to weigh out the risk of not acting versus the risk of acting, and the risk of not acting, going back to the risks of delaying and not progressing Plan Change 7, outweigh in staff's opinion, outweigh the risk of notifying a plan change with the lack of evidence for some water bodies.
And what about a third option, which is we don't notify, we spend 6 months, we properly resource and give the proper time or sufficient time for iwi to do that backfilling, and then we notify in 6 months' time the full 38 with sufficient evidence to support it.
You don't notify tank for 6 months.
Yep, we're still working on tank though.
And that was assessed during...
I know, I mean, tank's not ready to be notified today, but this is, I'm not talking about tank, I'm talking about this.
So with this, so that has been through the Section 32 analysis, and the risk of doing that versus the risk of notifying with your 38 water bodies, so you're notifying with your 38 water bodies is better than not notifying or delaying Plan Change 7 any longer because of these reasons up here, because you're pushing everything out.
And we're getting to diminishing returns. So there's been vast amount of work, vast amounts of engagement over a number of years, and
I don't agree, James.
putting another 6 months of deliberation into this is going to yield such little additional information to improve the quality of this plan beyond what we've got.
How do you know?
Because of the effort that's been put in to date.
Well, I have to dispute that. The evidence put in to date has been a literature review, and on day one we said that the literature review would provide some information, but that it was going to be flawed, because we know that a lot of tangata whenua don't have their water bodies conveniently documented for us. We said a long time ago, actually, that there would need to be good engagement with tangata whenua that would be resourced to enable them, because we can't drum up that information. We can't even employ an independent person to find that information without them engaging with the iwi. So the suggestion was that we needed to actually resource them to provide that, which is what we were trying to do at the last hui. So that was 4 weeks with minimal putia being offered. And the result of that is we haven't had the information come forth. And I would suggest that in part that's because there was insufficient time and insufficient funding. Now, we gave it a go, but it's still insufficient. And I think tangata whenua have been genuine in saying they want all these water bodies notified. So we have an option of these 2 options, or a third option, which is get the mahi done, and we've already recognised that there are gaps to be filled. We've already recognised that it's going to take a decent amount of time to allow that research to be done, and that might be 6 months, which is what has been suggested. So I think there is a third option we should consider, which is do the work we were supposed to do with the sufficient resources to do it, and then notify. That's the third option.
Through you, Chair. I think, obviously a very difficult circle to close this one. There's a kind of a tension in the instructions, and I think and there's been some pragmatism along the way. But as Belinda pointed, it's referred to at the start, is that the writing instructions at the start were no new reports. So it was effectively an analysis of existing literature and things like that. So I know that ultimately falls short of tangata whenua's expectations, and so when we're talking about the resourcing and the writing up of additional reports, then it effectively is, in some respects, it is an action that is working against the writing instructions. So if the writing instructions need to change, they change. And so I think where we got to last meeting was, look, a pragmatic attempt to recognise the realities and try and accommodate the plans that had been, the water bodies that had been provided through the overall assessment approach and in that discussion. So I'm not trying to bat this away, but I'm just trying to point to this tension between, a commitment to do this plan change without commissioning new reports and a need. I suppose what we need is a confirmation that we need new reports.
And the resourcing allocations benefits relative to cost, relative to everything else that we're trying to do in the planning work program.
Then I'm just asking, so as governors, we base decisions on the information you provide. So if you don't provide the appropriate information, how can we make a decision? So the question, because that's an operational issue, how you get your reports, and ours is to make good decisions based on good information. So the question is, how do we get good information to make a decision?
So I don't dispute that. What I'm pointing to is the instructions from this committee back in 2017 were to do this piece of work without commissioning on the basis of existing information, and so that is what it is. Those are our instructions. If in retrospect.
Well, I was made aware that those were premised in this other stuff would happen. That was the beginning, that you're going to go in, because a literature review was never going to be substantial enough for the outstanding water bodies for us to make a decision. So I'm focused on us making a decision. So it was part of a process. It wasn't the whole process, from my understanding from the other tangata whenua reps. So it still comes back to the point, how do we make decisions as governors if we don't have the information to premise the decision on?
So you've got all the information which is existing. The reason for not going and doing a whole bunch of new work is that there are a bunch of values that were being considered, including ecological ones, and the council didn't want vast ecological surveys being done over all water bodies across the region to fill the knowledge gaps we've got on it. This plan change doesn't warrant that level of resource relative to getting on doing the Mohaka plan change, the heavy science and the investigation of the values in place to do a far more comprehensive job. This has been completely over-engineered for the last 2 years, and it's just at the point where it's just not prudent.
If I dare say, the timing then probably didn't work for anybody because we were all in settlement mode. We're now through the gate. And I know myself, we could probably dedicate a resource ourselves to finalise or supplement the information. You've done a good job to get some information in. We can enhance that pretty quickly based on some of it's already in the deeds of settlement, which have only just come out. So a lot of that, I know for Heretaunga Tamatea, it's just so important that we take this opportunity to tidy this up. And this is not anybody's fault. It's just where we were, where you were, and trying to align the two work programs. We could dedicate a resource to get that, supplement that information in relation to the water bodies that are within our catchment, and probably, phone call away, talking to all the others.
Yep.
And their catchments, because we know our regions pretty well. But we would need 6 months. But we could give a commitment to get that done at no cost to the council. We'll do it
The government's commitment, Amy Adams gave Hawkesbury Regional Council $80,000 to do something. And that's the extent of the value that they put on this. And for me, I'm more focused on the Mohaka plan than I am.
Hallelujah. He's already got this outstanding.
Trying to say that our water is more outstanding than anyone else.
Well, that is the whole point, isn't it?
This is,
Peter?
To me, this is a bang for buck thing, and whether a water body is on the list or whether it is not on the list, it doesn't affect our treatment of it. It's just a complete waste of time. It's so frustrating seeing so much money and resource and time being spent on this to achieve what? Nothing. Let's get on with Mohaka. Let's be realistic about what the people that support these things are able to do.
What is the option you're recommending us? Option 1, was it? Option 2.
I just also in terms of I really appreciate that offer, and it's one thing to undertake the values assessment and to have identified them. What has been apparent, and which is what, when I review the plan, was very much behind the initial staff recommendation back in 2017, was how difficult it is to go from what are the values to what is the objective way in which you measure whether they're outstanding, and that's the really, really tricky piece. And so I suppose the question I have is that are we going to get, is that delay going to get us further resolved to that issue?
If it needs to, it needs to. Doesn't it? Right.
But anybody, if I understand the process,
I mean, we
anybody
haven't
can
seen it
submit.
yet.
Anybody can submit in this process and add 52 more if they want, right?
That's right.
Well, they could.
Well, I think the point
Is
we
that
made-
correct? Is that right? So is there a seconder to his motion?
Well, I think, see, this is the point where it comes back
He
to
offered a
6C,
point of order,
7A.
Mr. Chairman. He offered a motion.
Who offered the motion?
Neil,
Neil, did you move
20
it?
minutes ago, he moved the motion.
And you can find
I
it.
must have been asleep.
Oh, you too?
Did you move a motion to accept option 2?
Being facetious, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
It was being facetious.
Been what?
Facetious.
Defeated.
Facetious.
Facetious.
Grandstand.
I will move the recommendation,
Option 2.
Which one?
whatever the staff is recommending.
Option 2.
Option 2.
I'll second that.
You have a seconder. Okay, do you want to speak, Tom?
I would just echo what Peter said. This is well beyond the point of diminishing returns, given the important work that this committee has to do and this council has to do. I can't possibly stand spending another ratepayer dollar on this than I have to. If there are more, if there's a Moby Dick out there to be discovered after all of this analysis that is not on the list yet, then I'll leave it to a submitter to find it and put it on the list.
Neil?
Echo the sentiments. We can spend lots and lots of energy, time and money on this, and for what purpose when we've got much more significant goals in mind, dealing with those any outstanding bodies we've got. So let's invest wisely here. So it comes down to a prudent decision about how we use our resources and our energy. And going down this road just takes us nowhere. It goes finding out more than we know. It just doesn't go anywhere. It complicates the matter.
Any other speakers?
Yep.
Tanya?
Look, the reality is we haven't spent any money investing in tangata whenua to bring forward their values relating to these water bodies. On other plan changes, we spend anywhere from $60,000 to $10,000 inviting tangata whenua to tell us their values about various awa. That's what has been the practice thus far. I totally disagree that we wouldn't turn up other information. That will be for those tangata whenua groups to provide. And I think it's very dismissive to think that that isn't valuable or worthwhile, this investment. We heard James at the last meeting say, actually, this is not just about this plan change. The information collated will be valuable in the future whenever we're looking at these awa for resource consent purposes or other purposes. And remember, a lot of these awa are in areas that we are yet to do plan changes. So this is an opportunity to start gathering in that information. We signalled early on that the reliance on only literature was going to be flawed, because we know not all iwi have had the same opportunities as others to document their awa, and they shouldn't be disadvantaged, and we shouldn't be so dismissive. So you've had a generous offer from Heretaunga Tamatea to even look at resourcing this themselves. This is core to our work. We had tangata whenua nominate these water bodies, and frankly, operations needed to follow through with a way to ensure that we could actually enable tangata whenua to respond. Asking them to meetings, asking them to volunteer their information is not going to help. It's the same thing, I've made this analogy before. If we were to do a plan change and we rang up an ecologist, because we didn't happen to have one in-house, and we said to them, tell us everything you know about this awa. Meet you for a coffee, we'll have 2 hours, you tell us everything you know about this awa. Can you bring any other information you've got? Oh, we're not going to pay you, but it'll be really important. It will help us in our decision making. We don't do that with any other professional who has to provide valuable advice to us for our decision making. But that's how we treat tangata whenua in this plan change. And it's not acceptable, and I don't accept that we can just gloss over this It's not okay. It's not okay.
Criticised, that's the problem.
So I am opposed to the proposal that's been tabled. I prefer option 3. Do it properly. Do it properly.
Can I ask a question? What's the budget for this exercise?
Unlimited, apparently.
2,000.
Well,
It's been zero.
$2,000.
Zero so far.
It's not zero. It has occupied hours and hours and hours and hours of staff time and energy that could be placed elsewhere.
And they conceded that they didn't get enough information. That was conceded.
Peter, do you want to speak?
Yeah, this is just the law of diminishing returns. As I said before, whether you make the final list of outstanding water bodies or not, there is no difference to the way this council is going to treat them. This is an anachronistic requirement that should never have been put on this council. I'm really, it's one of the most frustrating things I've dealt with in the last 5 years, is seeing us spin our wheels and waste a truckload of money on something that makes no difference to the things that we're here to see achieved. And the less we spend on it, the better. That offer that you made, it's very kind and it can be encompassed within this recommendation. So that's why I'm supporting it.
Any other speakers? Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I couldn't agree more with some of the speakers when they talk about the whole premise for this particular plan change. It was a what was the term, a brain fart by Nick Smith that came up with it, and we're just having to deal with it. I also agree with what Tanya was saying in terms of any information we do gather about the outstanding water bodies will have great use elsewhere. It's not just a one-off for this particular plan. It can be used for other purposes as well. So in terms of making an investment and getting that information in, that would be not a bad thing. But in saying that, I also understand and appreciate that if we don't do something about notifying this plan now, it's going to delay everything else. So I have concerns about that as well. And in that respect, I'd be supportive of option 2, which allows submitters to get that information together over a 6-month period and get it in. But I also would like to see that the council is resourcing anyone who wants to be able to do that, because that's what we've been told today, that that is available.
And that's what it was.
Any other speakers?
Well, Mr. Chairman, before we finish, just looking at our Settlement Act, a Tamatea Settlement Act that the Crown gave us last year, and all the requirements in here that the regional council's got to do on these very things we're talking about. So it doesn't say we've got to do it, it says the council's going to do it, but we will be sitting in on it. That's what the Crown gave to us in part of our redress. I don't know, regional doesn't want to do it, well, you've opened the doors for us to go back to the Crown, and the Crown will climb down on you. We'll finish up in the Environment Court, I reckon. So I'm just giving the warning, that's all, because I mean it's a pile of work and I get tired of it. That's my second part of the same thing. I do read them. I read them at night, where there's 200, 300 pages. Take me 2 or 3 nights. So you can imagine the tension at home. So that's where it sits. Your choice, not ours. The Crown said you're going to do it, but how are you going to do it? That's yours. Kia ora.
Yeah, Peter, you are of course right. The Crown and Nick Smith actioned that. The Crown said we will nominate our outstanding water bodies. So it was, we had to do it. As you recall, when we said, Toro and I especially spoke very strongly, and he's refusing to talk now, because we thought this was just a joke, that the Crown were coming to us and saying nominate, and they expected us to nominate 3 or 4, remember? So, but we said that all of our water bodies were outstanding, And certainly each hapu and each marae thought that about their particular water body, even if it had been greatly degraded. So it was an impossible task for us to say we're only going to have 4 or 5. Then we ended up with this vast number. So yeah, we understand our obligation. Otherwise, I would throw it in the bin. And I know my co-chair would throw it in the bin as well, because it was an unreasonable request to go back to the community, and especially go back to Tana Te Whenua and say, you have to nominate this one and don't nominate that one.
Well, let's be clear, I support outstanding water bodies provided they're all considered to be outstanding.
That is my point.
It's the consistent view of Māoridom throughout the country, te mana o te wai.
Just a note. One of the pātai, to support Tony, one of the pātai this morning around the tank plan change was understanding how the outstanding water bodies would work with the tank plan change, and we don't have that either.
Yes.
So to say that its function is minimal, well, that's an outstanding question, which was agreed to get some clarification on. So making a decision without that information regarding how it impacts on or impinges on the tank plan change seems to be remiss for me. So I'm just noting the conversation from this morning.
Are there any more speakers? So we have a motion on the table to accept option 2. We have a mover and a second. All those in favour? Aye. Against? We better take a hands vote. You don't need. Vote has failed. Defeated. It is defeated.
I abstain.
Yeah, I know you abstained. I'm not sure where we go from there, Tom. The Chief Executive's not in the room to advise us. Is that it? Just it?
Well, motion fails. It stops there. It goes nowhere.
Well, no, we can we not consider option 3?
Well, I would have thought we could.
Okay.
Because that's constructive. At least we're moving to a date.
6 months.
Okay. Do you want to move option 3?
Yeah, I'll move option 3 that...
And yeah, we get what option 3
actually,
is.
I think I might even have some drafting. Give me 1 second.
Sorry.
Doesn't meet the section.
I'll second it. Once she's drafted it, which I'm sure I've seen.
What else he drafts?
Have you? No? Did you send me one we talked about?
It's come back to a
After
reasonable.
resolution?
Yeah.
There was 10. Okay. Have you got one? Yeah.
Oh, could you write some resolutions for me too, please, Annalise? Write a few more resolutions. I want them.
Yeah, no, yeah, 8,000 each.
No, 1,000.
Mr. Chair, it's sitting quietly, and I'm waiting for the information for comment.
Go back to the office and
Will there be an opportunity for question time?
Excuse me, Chair. Chair's having a sideline.
Just check. My mind's still running through the...
Toro, could you just shoulder tap Rex? Thank you. Is there an option of considering option 1? Option 2's been...
No, because we've now got the mover and second for option 3.
Move and second for option 3.
Okay.
Do we have to take that as a priority?
Could we highlight that there is a risk with this option 3 in terms of
Risk
meeting...
with everything. Risk of getting out
And
of
Belinda's
bed.
already taken us through these steps in terms of the section 32,
Yeah.
that by delaying that there are risks, and these are already highlighted in the section 32.
Yeah, we get the risk.
Everyone's aware of that?
We get the risk.
We're a high-risk enterprise here. Live on the
I
edge.
think we've just got a responsibility to move to mitigate it despite that. And if it works if it means you end up in a harmonious place where all 20 or 18 governors are working together, then it's got to be good.
Such information to be provided by...
6 months.
Make it 5.
Make it 5 and we get it in this...
Make it 4.
The other option. What about 3?
It's Freedom of Rights, can you do it in 4?
Stop being cynical,
In
Mark.
4 months? Can you do it in 4 months, Jenny? Oh, Jenny, won't you mind 4?
Yeah.
4, Nikki? Yeah. It's you 4. Okay.
Excuse me, Chair, also a point of clarification. If with the option 3, the submission period then would be the standard 20-day submission period?
Yeah. That we'd be comfortable with that.
Yes,
20
because we
days.
would have filled
so
the gaps by
having done
then,
all
wouldn't
this
we?
work, put it in once it's notified, standard period for notification of 20 days. Yep.
Yep, that's fine.
And tell us what option 3 is again,
By
please.
30
Coming up, I
November.
think. Just, yeah, I could write that down.
This committee can't instruct on funding.
We did last month.
It's not instructing, it's requesting.
And it's within discretion. I mean, it depends on the quantum, it's within discretion.
But they can't refuse.
I can't now, this one's on.
Okay, we have a mover and a seconder. Tanya, you wish to speak again?
It's October.
No, who was the seconder? Jenny.
They have to
Do you wish to speak?
Funding.
Sorry, how many water bodies are?
Well, there's a total of 38 that have been nominated. There are 18 that have been identified as having next to no information.
October, insufficient evidence.
Could be.
No, I think we've limited to the ones that have already been identified. That was clear last time.
Yeah.
There's no intention to bring forward new water bodies. It's the ones that have already been identified.
Ones that have been identified.
So it's 38, but
Yep.
that could come down if insufficient evidence is found for those that
That's a discussion we could
lacking.
potentially have, yes.
It's October, Tanya.
October, August, September.
This is beginning of July.
So it should be beginning of November then, beginning of
Okay, so...
pre-November.
Can I just ask a question, Chair? To the staff, if that brings it back to, because they've brought it back to the beginning of November and then the 20 days on top of that, does that kind of put us in the same sort of time frame of if we had a 6-month, because the options 1 and 2 looked at having a 6-month consultation period at any rate before it was notified, so in that respect...
No, notifying.
Notification and then a 6-month submission period.
Yeah.
This is a delay to the notification of 4 months, in which case the concerns or the matters raised in the Section 32 report around delay still apply, and then a more standard submission process post-notification.
So what you suggest, sorry, Chair, so what you're suggesting there, Tom, is that we wouldn't be able to notify plan change 9, tank plan change, until this one had been notified. That's what we're stuck
That is
on.
the risk
That
in
is-
doing this
There
option.
will be deep risk in doing so.
That's what was driving option 1, really, when you weigh up through the Section 32 report and you weigh up the risk of not notifying outstanding water bodies versus delaying your whole work program versus notifying a plan change with insufficient information where you fill in the gaps. That's why option 1 is preferable to
But when
that.
is our next RPC meeting to consider coming back on the tank plan change?
Aspirationally, the 14th of August.
Pardon?
14th of August.
14th of August? Is that our next RPC?
Yes.
Yeah, just
That's not far.
another question. That proposal asks for reasonable resources. Do you have any sense of what that might entail?
I would. So firstly, I think we should probably, can we get that up? I think the wording is
Annalee, could you bring up the wording, please?
I don't think I'll be adding anything of value.
the wording's problematic.
Yeah.
In terms of it's not, I think it's not staff, it's HBRC, and it's and I think the reasonable amount is open-ended, and it perhaps doesn't capture the maybe the ability to secure some co-funding from Heratong.
But at $1,000, it's 38,000, 2,000 at $2,000.
More than 1,000.
Well, I think, I mean, it would be helpful if that number was capped, and so that any amendment to that required some form of process, because really, I mean, in some respects, we have to wait and see what does the scope of work in fact look like, because in some respects you're talking about, is it just limited to the 18, or does that list grow through the process?
Well, I think there's 38. So,
For the ones that don't have sufficient information.
yeah, well, I think an assessment needs to be done by iwi on the ones that have already, on all 38, but they may actually decide that there's only the 18. But there will be no new water bodies coming forward other than the ones that we've already got. I've had a request to caucus, if that's all right, Mr Chair, to discuss the resolution and to discuss the original proposed resolution. So would you mind if we caucus for a brief period?
Sure. Is it all right, Deputy Chair?
Yeah. Oh, you're chairing.
No, I'm just affirming it.
Cool.
Are you all right with that? Well, if you go and caucus and you can say something to your caucus. Where are you going to caucus?
My Caramel room is probably empty.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. We're going.
Thank you. Can we just have 10 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Can Tangata Whenua reps come and
Can you
caucus?
bring back part ones too, please?
Dead one.
You're the ones not caucusing. You can do it that way.
Don't do it. We're going to caucus now.
That's all right.
We're emptying the room of Māoris, eh? Look at this. Look at Māoris getting up.
Walk out. First time, Mr.
Go on, Johnny, get out of here. No, we'll keep you. We'll keep you.
It is a public meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Penny.
Chairman.
Chair,
It is a public
would you
meeting.
like to just, I don't know, give us a 10-minute break? How would you do that?